This week on Q&A, Fox News political analyst Juan Williams is our guest to discuss his new book, Muzzled, The Assault on Honest Debate. The book includes the story of his 2010 firing from National Public Radio.
Juan Williams, author of Muzzled, The Assault on Honest Debate. You had a book party recently, and I just want to show a clip. We were there with our camera.
There was a moment back then when I thought my career was over. And I thought that, a career that had taken many years to build in Washington was going down the tubes fast. And today, many people thought, hey, we're going to a book signing, but you're really here for a celebration. I don't know if they have celebration at the end of those Survivor TV shows, but this is what it feels like to me. It's like, hey, I got my head back above the waves, I'm standing. And you can't get to that point without people who care about you, people who love you, and people who take you aside and tell you when you're wrong and how to deal with the situation, give you some counsel.
Why were you so afraid back then? Because it seems like today you've made out like a bandit.
It's interesting you say it that way, Brian, because I often get that response from men who say to me, hey, you got a big contract from Fox to cover any loss that you had from NPR. You did fine. And women, on the other hand, say to me, are you okay? Because I think they understand the emotional power that comes with not only being fired very publicly, but being branded as a bigot and told that, I hate to go over old ground, but the woman who was then running NPR saying, that anything that I say really is coming from some publicist and I should consult with a psychiatrist before I say anything more, that it felt as if not only was I being infantilized and made somehow less of an intellect and as a professional journalist, but my entire reputation and what I do as a journalist was being diminished in such a way that it would harm my value to future employers, that people would say, I just don't take that man seriously because, in fact, my journalism and my work oftentimes requires me to say things that don't make people happy, one side or the other. I tend not to be very predictable in that sense. And to be undermined in terms of my credibility in that way felt very threatening to me.
Let's jump back into it so everybody's on the same page. Here's that night on the Bill O'Reilly Show.
Political correctness can lead to some kind of paralysis where you don't address reality. I mean, look, Bill, I'm not a bigot. The kind of books I've written about the civil rights movement in this country. But when I get on a plane, I got to tell you, if I see people who are in Muslim garb, and I think, they're identifying themselves first and foremost as Muslims, I get worried. I get nervous. Now, I remember also that when that Times Square bomber was at court, I think this was just last week, he said the war with Muslims, America's war with Muslims, is just beginning, first drop of blood. I don't think there's any way to get away from these facts, but I think there are people who want to somehow remind us all, as President Bush did after 9/11, it's not a war against Islam.
When did you know that was controversial?
I didn't.
What year? What was that? Back in December of 2010.
Yes, and no, it must have been early because it must have been October of 2010, because this happened. That was on a Monday night when I do the O'Reilly Show for Fox News Channel, and then I went home. I had no clue, Brian. I never had a moment of thought, oh, I should have phrased that differently or said something in a different context or whatever. And then went off to give a speech in Chicago, asked about it, in fact, congratulated by some people who were Muslims in the Chicago airport for standing up. No idea it was controversial until I was going to New York on the Wednesday after this, and a lady called who's a friend at an advocacy group here in Washington to say that her office was being flooded with these emails that said that I should be fired. And I said, oh, what for? I said, you know what? Everybody, left and right, has something to say about me at some point. I just don't take it that seriously. And I went off and did my day in New York at the Fox News Channel's headquarters there. And it was only at 5 o'clock then that I got a call from the lady who runs the news division at NPR informing me that I was being fired, asking me how dare I say that it was a bigoted statement. I said, what are you talking about? Did you hear did you hear the entirety? Oh yes, we've heard it, and this has been affirmed from the higher ups, you're gone. And I'm like, shouldn't I have the opportunity to come in and talk to you? Can't we look at this together? No, there's nothing you can say that would make a difference. I couldn't believe what was going on, because if you played a clip of that tape, I go on in that. If you see the entirety of it, it's very clear I am building an argument. I'm saying, we don't make judgments about all Christians based on the behavior of Timothy McVeigh or the people at the Westboro Baptist Church who have horrible, offensive rants at the funeral of military personnel. We don't leap to those judgments, and we shouldn't leap to those judgments about Muslims. I was not in any way suggesting that we have a discriminatory policy against people who are dressed in Muslim garb. I was simply confessing to a feeling, an anxiety that I have in a certain situation.
Do you have any idea how, and Ellen Weiss is the woman I gather that fired you, who
Yes.
was at NPR, is no longer there.
Yes.
She lost her job herself. But do you have any idea how she found out about this?
No, I don't. I mean, my thought, just sitting here speculating with you, is that there was a internet campaign launched by the Council on Arab and Islamic Relations in the United States, CARE. And in it they said that I had committed an act of bigotry and called for me to be fired. And I think that's what the friend at the advocacy group who called me was referring to, was that internet campaign. And I guess that caught the attention of Ellen Weiss.
We're going to run the Bill O'Reilly show, in which there's a clip in there of the former head of NPR, Vivian Schiller, where she talks about you in a speech, I believe, in Atlanta. Let's watch this.
Then she goes on and gives a speech today.
Oh, I know about
Okay? And listen to this clip. Roll it.
Juan feels the way he feels. That is not for me to pass judgment on. That is really his feelings that he expressed on Fox News are really between him and his, psychiatrist or his publicist, or take your pick. But it is not compatible with a news analyst with the role of a news analyst on NPR's air.
Are you kidding me?
I mean, so now I'm a
psychiatrist?
Now I am mentally unstable.
And this is
I'm
the
a
woman
journalist
who's running this operation?
Oh my God! I mean, come
It
on.
is. It is. It's unbelievable.
So that's insult. So now it
she
becomes
apologized.
personal.
She apologized. She did after it.
Not to me.
Well, okay, that's a good point.
Let me start with the reaction to the psychiatrist thing. Is somebody that goes to a psychiatrist a psycho?
That's the implication. But let me just say, as offensive as that is, that anybody who would seek help at a moment of crisis in their life or whatever, and I wasn't at that time, and that's one level of offense. The second level is, why would she be attacking someone who, was an employee in this very public manner? I think it was meant to demean me, marginalize me, and I think at that point she had started to understand that there was some blowback there's some consequence, public consequence to her action, because it was seen as unfair.
Vivian Schiller lost her job. Before that, Ellen Weiss lost her job. But let's go back in your case. You were the Washington Post. From what year on?
I came to the Post as an intern in 1976 out of Haverford College. I had worked at a newspaper in Philadelphia during college, the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin, which is now defunct. And before that, I had worked, I'd been the editor of my junior high school paper. I'd done some freelancing for a paper in Poughkeepsie, New York, while I was in high school even. And then came to the Post as an intern and, became, the local police reporter, the education reporter, an editorial writer. Then I was the White House correspondent, congressional correspondent. Then I was like kind of a political analyst type person working for the main section, and then the Outlook, which is the Sunday news and review section, and then a magazine writer. And then I wrote several books.
When was the first moment you had contact with NPR where they were asking you to come work for them?
I had gone to work for NPR in 2000. That's the official start date. Actually, toward the end of 1999, I had just finished writing my biography of Justice Marshall, and the question was, what would I do next? And I'd signed a contract with the Washington Post and Newsweek, at the time Washington Post owned Newsweek, to do long-form journalism for both, and didn't require me to be directly in the newsroom, but to just be on assignment for them. And that's when NPR came to me and
Who?
said,
You remember how it happened?
yeah, well, there was Bruce Drake, who was then the top executive for news at NPR, and Kevin Close, who was a former editor at the Washington Post, who had gone on to become president of NPR. Bruce Drake had said that he and Kevin Close thought I should have an opportunity to sit in and see what it would be like for me to be the afternoon talk show host for the show called Talk of the Nation. They had just lost their host. And when I came in and did it for 3 days, then one of their top executives came and said, actually after I'd done it for 2 days, what do you think about doing this full time? And I said, I had never been a radio news guy. I've always been a print news guy, and I've done some TV. I had done TV for Inside Washington, which was then owned by the Washington Post, and also for CNN. And she said, you're just natural at this. We would be honored to have you come and join us. And
Do you remember who that was?
Yeah, I don't remember her last name. Barbara is her first name. And then Barbara and Bruce, engaged in contract negotiations with me. I might add here, because I think it's relevant to our conversation, Brian, that I was already working at Fox News Channel. I'd been working at Fox News Channel since 1997. It was okay with the Washington Post. It was okay with NPR when they hired me.
When was the first moment that you and Ellen Weiss crossed swords?
Ellen, when I began at NPR, I think for most of my tenure there, she was the executive producer of All Things Considered, the afternoon news show. And I never worked for them. Occasionally pieces would be taken from the work that I was doing either in Talk of the Nation or for Morning Edition. Some little piece might end up there. But I never had much professional interaction. Of course, courteous, hi, good morning, how are you? Never had lunch with her or anything like that. But then when she became the top news executive in the midst of some changes at NPR, she picked up this baton of criticism of, why are you working for Fox? And I said, previous generations of leadership here have been through this issue. Ombudsmen have been through it, because there were some people who would say, why is a leading personality for NPR also working for Fox? And everybody has come to the conclusion there's nothing problematic about it. That in fact, as I've said, I think it expands the universe of people who are aware of NPR people, and that put us, that might come to NPR as a result of seeing me engaged in debate with some of the strong personalities on Fox. And then subsequent to that, then there was arguments about, well, why do you write for the New York Times? Why do you write for the Washington Post? Why are you writing books? And I said, well,
with Ellen Weiss.
With Ellen Weiss. And I'd say, well, I write, I was a writer. That's how I came into this business of journalism. I'm a writer. And she would say, well, we want to approve what you write first. And I said, I'm not comfortable with that. She said she wanted to see book proposals and and I said, I don't think so. I think that was never part of my contract, never part of our arrangement. Why now? And in specific, she was upset about a piece that I had written for the New York Times. It was after the Brown-related decision by the Supreme Court, in which I said, we really are moving now way past the Brown decision and into a new realm where the idea of court-imposed desegregation is falling away. We're going to have to look for new remedies in terms of segregation in our public school systems. And she said, well, you're attacking Brown, you're attacking teachers' unions. I said, I'm not attacking anybody. I was telling a story. And in addition, I am not the beat reporter on education here. My job at that time was as a news analyst. So what's the problem here? I'm making a substantive argument. And she said, no, we don't like it. And we don't want you doing it. I said, this is a problem. And then she at one point said she didn't want me to identify myself as an NPR reporter or analyst or anybody who did political work for NPR, especially when I was on Fox and on Fox opinion shows. And I said, look, I'll do whatever you want, because I am a big fan of NPR. I value them as a journalistic platform, a massive audience, and the audience, for the most part, hugely supportive of me. I mean, the stations would ask me to come out and visit and attract audiences, and certainly to make ads asking people to contribute to NPR. And I wanted to be there, but she made it very difficult, eventually pushed me off the staff and made the relationship one that was based on a contract, and then immediately began cutting my salary and diminishing my role on the air.
I want to introduce the audience to Ellen Weiss. We haven't seen her in this process, this back and forth. She's not appeared on any program. And she lost her job after she had fired you.
That's right. Now, I don't know the insides of this. All I can tell you, and I think this has all been public, is that NPR hired an outside law firm to look into this and to see what had taken place, and came back with findings that said it was legal, what they did in terms of my contract. But then apparently there was some back and forth about who knew what and who was authorized to do what and the basis from which it was done and how it was done, and that led her to leave.
Want to give her a chance. I mean, she's welcome here anytime, but I want to give her a chance. We found this video from May 18th, 2010. It was a talk she gave the Canadian journalists and news executives in Toronto. Let's roll.
Now, this is self-identification, but NPR's audience, in asking them to self-identify themselves, one-third identifies themselves as conservative, one-third as liberal, and one-third is in the middle. So it's not that we only, I mean, we don't just appeal to one type of person or one person with one political perspective. That's not what we want to be about, and that's not how we promote ourselves. And I actually think that because of that, I think that is in part why our audience is growing. I mean, for me, one of the most dangerous trends that I've watched in broadcast media, particularly in the United States, I can't speak about Canada, is the idea of niche programming, of creating content for people to hear their own views played back to them. And, you know, that's always existed, and it's fine, but the problem is that it's not just that it's one perspective, it's that what I'm increasingly hearing is that anybody who has a different perspective being demonized. And that, to me, is really dangerous. I think that is one of the scariest things for democracy, again. I mean, I don't mind that people go and, you know, want to hear the talk radio person that they like. It's how they talk about other people who have different opinions.
What's your reaction to what she just said?
Well, you know, given what has taken place, you know, I feel like I'm the one that was demonized in her mind for appearing on a conservative, with conservative personalities on Fox. She clearly found that objectionable, and here she is saying, you know, she wants to encourage debate. Well, if she wanted to encourage debate, what's wrong with someone from NPR engaging in debate with Sean Hannity? I don't understand the problem. In terms of her overall assessment of the media landscape, I think she's on target. Yes, there's more niche programming today than ever before that's intended to appeal to people who simply want pre-existing opinions affirmed, whether they're banging on the dashboard of their car listening to some radio talk show host, or selecting a program on TV or a magazine from the news rack. People tend to say, or in this day and age, going to an internet site, people of like mind tend to flock together, and there's a danger there because you want to make sure in terms of the American experience that people are aware of what's going on for people who are not just like them. That, you know, that some poor kid living in a poor neighborhood has to be a real person, not just a threat to someone who's living in a leafy, rich suburb. And so I'm all for that. But the idea then that she would somehow say that's why NPR, you know, lead in her mind to then an NPR personality, me, somehow then being, you know, not up to journalistic standards because he's going on Fox. It's just crazy.
You know, there's a whole world that exists that thinks that the old days were the better days.
Right.
I mean, you even write in your book that Walter Cronkite and Edward R. Murrow couldn't make it in today's market. Right. The genie's never going to get back in the box on this thing. So she said it's a dangerous trend that we have niche program. Why is it dangerous where people can go hear what they want to hear about their own views?
As I said, I think the danger there is that they're not aware of other points of view.
Yeah, but hasn't that always been the case? We've had newsletters for hundreds of years.
Well, I think it's more accelerated today. I think the environment we live in is, and this is one of the big issues that I address in Muzzled, is that there are now so many advocacy groups, so many special interest groups that will simply tell you that you are out of line if the narrative that you suggest does not comport with the line of argument that they want advanced in order to either raise money or to win some conversation, win a piece of legislation on the Hill. You stop and think about it. In recent days, we've had a terrible dust-up on Capitol Hill between two Congress people, Alan West of Florida and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, where to my mind, she was saying, you know what, you want to vote against Medicare and Medicaid, you want substantial cuts in this, and then he fires back that she's a vile person. You hear those kind of things and you think, you know what, I don't want either side to be unaware of what one side is saying, but ultimately it just freezes the conversation. The notion of real debate, honest transaction is eliminated. And if you get people locked into, I'm going to take this guy's side or this woman's side and not hear what the other side is saying, I do think it presents a problem for a well-informed electorate.
You talk about, in your book, you have a chapter called The Provocateurs. Mm-hmm. Before I ask you more about that, I want to run a clip from the Rachel Maddow show, because you also talk about her in here. Right. Let's watch that, and I'll get your reaction to what she does with your story.
Okay.
The shorthand headline for what happened with Mr. Williams today is Juan Williams fired from his job because of those comments about Muslims. To be more precise about it, to be more accurate, it should be noted that Juan Williams had 2 jobs, and he lost one of them. He lost his job on National Public Radio, which said that his comments were, quote, inconsistent with our editorial standards and practices. So Juan Williams is no longer working for National Public Radio. That's true. But he most certainly did not lose his job at Fox News. In fact, today Juan Williams was given a raise at Fox News as a result of this whole thing. Quote, Fox News handed Williams a new 3-year contract Thursday morning in a deal that amounts to nearly $2 million, a considerable bump up from his previous salary. Wow, nearly $2 million, mazel tov. Fox News chief executive Roger Ailes said of Mr. Williams, quote, he's an honest man whose freedom of speech is protected by Fox News on a daily basis. If you mean freedom of speech in a legal sense, in a constitutional sense, let's be clear here. This is not a First Amendment issue. Juan Williams has the right, every American citizen has the right constitutionally to say anything that he wants. All of us do. That's what the First Amendment does. The First Amendment does not guarantee you a paid job as a commentator to say what you want. Your employment as a person paid to speak is at the pleasure of your employer. And in this case, it displeased Juan Williams' employer, at least one of them, for him to have reassured the Fox News audience that he, too, is afraid of Muslims on airplanes and that that's not a bigoted thing. That comment did not fly with one of the people who was paying, one of the organizations that was paying Mr. Williams to say what he thinks. And so Juan Williams lost that job. This is not a First Amendment issue. This is an issue of what your employer is okay with. And at Fox News, it is not only okay to talk about Muslims being scary on airplanes. It is expected. It is part of the agenda. It is what they are selling.
Expected?
I don't know where she gets that from. Nobody said to me, oh, you have to do this, or suggested I do it. Never done before. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's part, we were talking earlier about the niche markets, and I think that MSNBC has their antagonistic attitude towards Fox, and a rivalry exists, but there's no reality to someone expecting or telling me what to say or demanding that I say. As I say, I've worked there since 1997, and I can say without hesitation, no one's told me you've got to say this or do this. I even had one guy from a British newspaper say, and this is, I think, the paraphrase, but it's pretty close to a quote, Brian, that I had been somehow pandering to the Fox audience, and this is the quote part, lay down with dogs, get up with fleas. And that's the end of the quote. And again, the suggestion is that I'm not there challenging people, engaging in real debate, and I was even that night with Bill O'Reilly, engaged in a vigorous debate. People can say what they want, but Bill O'Reilly said to me that night, tell me where I'm wrong. He didn't close it off. He didn't say, hey, you're going to defend people who think that I'm wrong. O'Reilly had said that Muslims killed us on 9/11 and radical Muslims had done this, and that had prompted people to walk off the show The View. And it was the next show that he had me on as his lead guest, and we engaged in this conversation that has so subsequently become so controversial.
If you were able to go to a dinner party, I mean, not a party, but a group of people, and Ellen Weiss was at the table, and they were all talking about this whole thing.
Right.
What would they say in that room? What was her real beef with you? What do you think it is?
I think it was my presence on Fox. I think that bothered her tremendously.
Why don't they like Fox?
Well, I think what you heard from Ms. Weiss in that tape that you played was that she thinks that Fox, well, she said she had a problem with niche journalism, and I think she believes that Fox is the epitome of niche journalism.
What is wrong, in your opinion, with niche journalism? Forget just from our last conversation, but why? It's a free country. There's a First Amendment.
Right.
You know, and what define journalism?
Define
Please.
journalism.
Define journalism.
Well, it should be a journal of our times. It should reflect all aspects of our contemporary society. That's what journalism is. You know, Ben Bradley, or was it? I think actually Bradley might have been quoting another former Washington Post publisher, that journalism should be a first draft of history. That as best as you and I can do on a daily basis, give the reader, the journalist, the consumer, a sense of what's taking place in our society, the trends, the powers, the laws, the politics of our time.
When you were at NPR, did you feel they were doing that?
Yeah, but again, I think that, you know, now I've said to you that on Fox, I've never had anybody tell me what to say. NPR's journalism is much more of a construct. You know, they're much less live. You know, at one point, Ellen Weiss, in those conversations that we had about Fox, had said to me, yeah, but there are so many conservatives over there. And I said, yeah, but there's so many liberals over here at NPR. And she would say to me, but, you know, don't they, in fact, try to heighten debate? And I'd say, well, you know what? We edit tape over here at NPR to heighten debate and different points of view. I don't see that there's anything very different. So, yeah, I didn't understand her on this issue at all.
Here's what you write in the Provocateurs chapter. Today's provocateurs in politics and the media seed conflict everywhere. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think that at some point people then become inured to the idea that you need compromise and you need to have to negotiate the definition of politics. You asked me about the definition of journalism earlier. Definition of politics should be the art of compromise, because you can't just adhere to principles and say, I am standing on my base and principle and I will not compromise. That's not politics. That might be campaigning.
Well, let me read more. But nowhere do they show a genuine interest in bringing Americans together to achieve positive results. Where is it written that anybody in journalism ought to bring people together to achieve a positive result?
I don't think that it's written, but I think that if you are being honest as a journalist, you should present both sides of the conversation at some point so that people understand the different points of view.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Because I think you want to be fully informed.
Has it always been that way?
Well, no.
Did Edward R. Murrow always present both sides whenever he did his journalism?
Well,
Was Harvest of Shame balanced?
Oh, I thought it was. You know what?
Was Joe McCarthy balanced?
I think that he was clear at some point in condemning McCarthy's tactics. But I don't think it was ever the case that if you were watching Edward R. Murrow at the time that you would have been unaware of what his argument was.
Except they were unwilling to put Joe McCarthy on the air until after it was over and there was criticism, and then they finally gave him time.
That's right, but I don't think you were unaware of the argument.
You write in here that, and one surefire way to get attention in the 1447 news world is to say something outrageous. As a result, we have an entire graduate class of professional provocateurs. Is Bill O'Reilly a provocateur?
I think that there are times when Bill has been a provocateur. He's changed. I think he's much more down the middle now, and he's trying to what he calls the no spin zone. But I think that he's trying not to be a guy that's predictable. The other day he was on with Michelle Bachmann, and he just held her feet to the fire, and I complimented him on it. And then subsequently I noticed that the viewers wrote into him to say, why were you so harsh with Michelle Bachmann and you're not being a good conservative and all this. So, I mean, the Bill O'Reilly I know, and certainly the one I know personally, is not that provocateur. Now, let me just say that once Bill's off, Sean Hannity comes on, and I don't have any question, Sean can be very highly provocative and clearly stakes his position out as a right-winger, as a strong conservative voice in terms of media personality.
But if you tune in, the successful ones today are the ones that say strong things and say outrageous things.
Correct.
And you, as somebody just said, you've come out of this with a 3-year contract for a lot of money on a station that or a network that's provocative. And what's wrong with that? I mean, you're in a provocative atmosphere. You wouldn't have that successful perch up there at Fox News if it wasn't provocative.
You mean if Fox wasn't provocative?
Right, or if MSNBC wasn't successful until they became provocative.
Well, that's true. And I think that the difference here is if you're asking me about my behavior or you're asking me about the network, I think that, as we discussed earlier, I've written in that book, Muzzled, that I don't think that Walter Cronkite would be a success in American media today. I think people would think that he was bland, he was boring, he was too invested in the details of the story as opposed to offering a point of view and helping people understand what he thinks about it. What the people who dominate in prime time in America today, news, tend to be strong, authoritative personalities, and times even arrogant personalities. People are drawn, apparently viewers enjoy that. Now, when I appear with those personalities, I'm willing to take them on, I'm willing to challenge them, but I don't think I say things, I hesitate, but I don't think I say things in order to be provocative or just stir the pot. I'm engaged in real debate and conversation. I value what other people have to say. I want to hear what they have to say.
Ellen Weiss would say that's exactly what you did when your comments about Muslims.
I don't think she was right, and I'll reiterate. I was building an argument, and if you look at the entirety of it, rather than taking it out of context, you will see that I'm saying, yes, Bill, I understand what you're saying. In fact, the truth is, the people who attacked us on 9/11 were Muslims, and they were citing holy jihad as the purpose and reason for the attacks. But let's move on and let's talk about the fact that we don't stereotype Christians on the basis of bad behavior by one Christian, whether it's the Atlanta bomber or the Westboro church. We don't do that, and we shouldn't be saying things that might lead someone like this minister down in Florida to burn the Koran or someone to attack a cab driver in New York. I said all of that, Brian, at the time speaking to Bill O'Reilly. So it was part of a larger construct in terms of debate. And someone took that little bit out of context, and then I think Ellen Weiss used it to satisfy a long-standing feeling that I should not be working at NPR because I was working at Fox.
Is Nina Totenberg with NPR a provocateur?
At times she is. She's made some really outrageous comments, the most well-known of which is when she said that Jesse Helms, the former North Carolina senator, she said that because of his opposition to some AIDS research funding that she thought that there might be some justice in his death.
And she's been their justice correspondent and the Supreme Court correspondent for years. I want to run that clip, though. We found the clip of Nina Totenberg. See what you want to say.
Yeah, I think he ought to be worried about about what's going on in the good Lord's mind, because if there's retributive justice, he'll get AIDS from a transfusion, or one of his grandchildren will get it.
That's been brought up. I mean, it's been written about. Why is that not provocative? And why would, it looks like it was quite a few years ago. Ellen Weiss wasn't the boss then. But why are they not controversial and you controversial? What do you think?
That's a hard one for me because I don't think there's any question that she is making not only a highly provocative but offensive statement. And it's been allowed to stand. And I think that there are people at NPR, Nina Totenberg and some others, who are allowed, full latitude in terms of making these statements, provocative, outrageous statements, with no consequence to them and to their careers as journalists.
Why do you think they make an exception?
Well, I don't think there's an exception. I think that people who are considered part of the in crowd at NPR, people who are part of that history, NPR has been around since the early 70s, and I think that there are people who are seen there as the insiders. They're seen as the people who should have authority, and I'm not. And I was not part of the club. I was not given that kind of authority, and I was not given that kind of protection for saying what was on my mind. To the contrary, I was thrown out.
I want to run more of Ellen Weiss, who was their boss.
Right.
Is not there. It's 28 years she spent at NPR.
Right.
And let's talk some more about NPR.
Okay.
As the statistics show, America, and I'll add Canada, isn't facing a dearth of news consumers. Rather, it is facing a shortage of reported news, an imminent, acute shortage of reliable, fact-checked, evidence-mediated, trusted information about local, national, and international current events gathered by professionals who are trained, specialized, professional, and ethical. It is a dreadful irony that as information technology has vastly expanded society's capacity to collect and distribute this special kind of information traditionally called news, that technology is also challenging the revenue model that has supported that business practice. This is the stark new reality.
What do you think?
Well, you know, this is another situation where I think when she speaks in this way, she is not reflecting any reality. The reality is that people are interested in journalism, interested in substantial reporting, and she makes it out to be that this doesn't exist anymore, that that there's a shortage of this substantial reporting. I don't think there's a shortage of substantial reporting in this country. I think there are more and more outlets for real reporting, including the internet, magazines, news channels, cable channels. It seems to me a multiplicity of places to get information and get news coverage. She seems to regret that and suggest, you know, there should be specific places where journalists are allowed to practice in certain ways. Again, these are people who would hold up NPR without identifying NPR's own bias in the way that they present news. Let me just finish on this point, Brian. I think there are people like NPR who select certain stories to be told and play those stories and give authority to certain personalities, whether they're political or cultural, and then suggest, well, that's who we will put on our ear without attaching the significance of their act and saying, you know what, they too have some bias. The way that she talks is, you know, she is the keeper of the flame of all virtue in terms of journalism, when in fact, NPR had its own bias, had its own leanings, had its own niche in terms of the audience. When she's condemning niche journalism, I think she has a certain blindness to what the kind of journalism she was practicing.
Liberals would love to know how conservative it is inside of Fox News, and conservatives would like to know how liberal it is inside of NPR.
Yeah.
So tell us.
Well, I think much of this has to do with the leadership. Now, if you ask me about NPR, I would say one of the big problems is, and we talked about the clubbiness, the sort of very tight niche of people who were running it and how they had similar points of view, similar life experiences. This is a place where, you know, to not be liberal, not be identified as liberal would have been extraordinary.
How do you know, though? I mean,
because I know those people. I worked with those people for many years. Remember, I was there for 10 years. So I saw people come and go, and I can tell you that it was definitely a very clubby, liberal atmosphere. That's who was there. That's who was running the place.
Did you ever meet a conservative in NPR?
No.
Never.
You mean in terms of NPR management?
Management or on air or a reporter or...
No.
No? How about, did you ever meet a liberal inside of Fox?
Sure, I'm a liberal inside of Fox.
But how liberal? People, you know, we always hear people in town saying Juan Williams is every conservative's liberal, and pick somebody, David Brooks is every liberal's conservative. I mean, are you that liberal?
No. Well, I don't know how we measure this. I don't know how you would quantify it, but I would say that if you were asking about something like affirmative action, I'm a supporter of affirmative action. If you're asking about gun control, I'm definitely a supporter of gun control. So, I mean, but I don't know. So I don't know how you would measure. But if those were brass tacks, I would say I'm pretty liberal on those points. If you're asking me, though, you know, to try to be direct with you about a political situation, I am not going to be predictable in terms of saying, oh, the left is always right or the right is always wrong or always right. I'm going to try to tell you what I honestly think. I'm going to see if we can agree. We may have points of disagreement, but I'm going to try to give you my honest assessment of what's taking place.
You know, the conservative talk show hosts always run against every day the mainstream media.
Right.
Do you think that's fair?
I don't know what fair matters. As you said to me earlier in this conversation, what's wrong with people telling you using niche-type journalism or techniques, provocative techniques to stir the pot?
But why do they get so upset about the mainstream media when, if you're a conservative today, you can live in that world all day long and never have to worry about the mainstream media?
Well, I think that's objectionable, by the way. I think that's, in fact, what Ellen Weiss was talking about, that people need to get outside of that very small world and hear other points of view, understand that they're different.
Yeah, but you can't force people to do that.
You can't force people, but I think that as a matter of good journalism and saying, you know what, here is an opportunity for you to be fully informed, it does matter. And I think that, I would suggest that she's right on that point.
Who practices good journalism in your opinion today?
Oh my gosh, there are lots of people that practice good journalism. I mean, good journalism is not, by the way, avoiding the niche. Good journalism is, to my mind, making sure that you have a broad array of voices, points of view, experiences evident in terms of your presentation. So, I think that if you were to ask me, I think there's lots of good journalism around. In fact, there are more sources of journalism today with the internet, with cable news, than there's ever been. There's a plethora of places you can go and try to get information. The problem would be if you pick out certain ones and just stay right there and never open your eyes to other points of view.
There are a couple of brothers that have a blog, a video blog. They're called the Daily Conversationalists. This isn't very long. It's two brothers. They're just their first name, Brendan and Bryce, who I don't think you'll agree with them, but let's let you see what they say about you.
Okay.
We both agree that Juan Williams had been warned. Right. And he continued to do and to speak out in actions and would go on these shows and directly contradict what NPR wanted him to do.
And just what NPR is all about, and going against its mission statement, which he clearly knew. He signed his contract.
Right.
So now he's been fired. We applaud NPR for that. Now he gets to go be Token on Fox News.
It just signed a $2 million contract.
He gets $2 million 3-year contract. So Fox claims him as their own. Everybody's really a winner here.
Everybody's really a winner here. We kind of started that way.
I just find this so insulting. So it's token. Like, oh, I'm a token. What am I token? Because of my skin color or because of my politics? I think that I work there, and I think that I have value to that management team and to that audience. I don't think I would be there if I didn't have value. So I think that I have, in that sense, especially after my career at the Washington Post, CNN, and NPR, I think that, and the books that I've written, some of them New York Times bestsellers, I think that you could say, you know what, this is a person who has some merit in the field of journalism, has developed a career at 57 years old, and instead they want to present me as a token. The second thing that they said was that I should be aware that NPR didn't want me, there are things NPR didn't want me to say. Well, wait a minute. What kind of journalist? So in other words, the journalist is not allowed to speak honestly. He's supposed to simply adhere to some standard or some bill of, orders that comes from one employer. That's a very interesting kind of journalism. In other words, you're just a talking head. You're just a mouthpiece for one political point of view or another. It's not me.
But as things change, I mean, here is niche. Here's a blog. Anybody can get on and find these two guys. They can do their own thing, and they're saying they're on television. Is that good or bad for the society?
Well, it's fine. I mean, as I said, I think that, in fact, there's more news sources, more opinion in the news universe than ever. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. But you have to be a very alert news consumer in this environment. Would I grant those gentlemen credibility as a reliable news source? Do I believe they actually talked to people like me before they're making comments? Do I think they're well informed? No, I don't think that. They can say outrageous things. They can try to get more of an audience by saying outrageous things or catering to people who have one set of beliefs or another.
But take that and then apply that to NPR, which you said is elitist and liberal and only one thought coming out of there. Why should anybody then pay attention to them if they're looking at the world, all of them looking at the world through liberal eyes, or vice versa, Fox looking at it through conservative eyes?
I think you should be aware of them. I think that in both places you can find examples of good journalism, and certainly they're representative of points of view. If you look at, now let me just say there's a big difference. To me, Fox is in the cable news business. NPR is in the radio business, mainstream radio business. And Fox has these strong personalities in prime time, the ones we've been talking about, O'Reilly and Hannity. And there you're going to get very strong medicine, strong opinions, authoritative, tall, white male, driving home a point of view that I think hold an audience. So I don't think there's any question about that. NPR, on the other hand, does not do that. I think people have a hard time. It's interesting. A lot of people knew who I was on NPR, but I think people would have a hard time naming many of the hosts on NPR. So, you know, instead, I think the way that NPR presents it is, oh, well, we're neutral. We're just like water. You know, what does water taste like? And everybody says, oh, I'm not getting any strong political point of view, without admitting that there is a point of view.
Let me talk about your book a little bit and about your family. Sure. One of the things that I don't think I've ever asked you about is you were born in Cologne, Panama.
Yeah.
Why? Why were you there? Why was your mom there?
Well, let me start. My father was there because my grandfather was one of the people who built the Panama Canal. He was one of the workers, and he died there. You know, there was a tremendous amount of disease. I don't know if you ever read David McCullough's book on this, but tremendous amount of disease, influenza, you know, mosquitoes and all the rest. And so he died there, and then my dad, who was born in Jamaica, went to Panama. My other grandfather also went to Panama because of the canal. He went there to open a restaurant for workers on the canal and for people of color who were workers there. They had a gold standard, which was for the whites, and then they had silver for people of color, and that was the blacks, the Chinese, the Hispanics, who were the laborers. And he opened a restaurant for them, and that's why my mother was born in Panama. So my father's born in Jamaica, my mother in Panama.
And at the recent press club when you spoke, you introduced your son, who is just graduating from Haverford.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Raphael. Rafi.
What's he going to do?
Well, this summer, he spent the last 2 summers in China. One, he worked for China Daily, and then the second one, he worked for Hill & Knowlton, the public relations firm. And this summer, he's working for Hill & Knowlton here in Washington. My other son, by the way, Tony Williams, is an executive at Comcast in Philadelphia for the Comcast cable company.
What's he doing? He
just helps them with lobbying and putting together different kinds of deals and public images, public relations imagery, mostly for state and local government, not so much for the federal government. But he was involved. One of his endeavors was with this NBC-Comcast merger.
You have a daughter?
I have a daughter, yes.
What's her name?
Reagan. And Ray is a Ray is a lawyer in San Francisco, and you know, involved in employment law and very successful.
You also introduced your wife, Delise.
Yes.
Tell us about her. Where'd you meet her?
I met her here in Washington. As I told you, Brian, I came to Washington in 1976, and in 1977, I met her at a disco in DuPont Circle. And we got married in 1978, so we've been married for 33 years.
And what's her profession?
She was a social worker. She's now pretty much retired, and a mother of 3.
This book, when did you, this whole event started in October of 2010. Who first suggested the book?
Publishers came to me. I had been in conversation about doing a book about the Founding Fathers, and so Crown, which has published several of my, I think Crown's published just about all my books. Penguin published the first one. But Crown has published almost all my subsequent books, came to me and said, we're interested in something here, but there were several other publishers who also, given the amount of publicity, and it was just a storm of publicity surrounding my firing, said that we'd like to get the inside story here. And so Crown came to me in such a way, and because of my experience with them, that I decided, I would like to do it with Crown.
And that's Random House?
Yes.
Owners of Crown? Mm-hmm. 2-book contract?
Yes.
You say in here, Michael Clementi, Vice President for News at Fox, took charge of masterfully guiding me through the first days of telling my side of the story and keeping me on track despite the big stakes and all the pressures at play. Explain what happened and why you had Mr. Clementi as your guide there. What happened right afterwards, and why did you need guiding?
Well, first I should say that Mr. Clementi is the Vice President for the news operation, so not the prime time opinion-oriented shows, the personality shows, but he's there in terms of making sure that the news packages, the reporting is on mark. And what had happened was that the night that I got fired, remember I said to you that I just got this call from Ellen Weiss and it was 5 in the evening. I got to tell you, Brian, my head was spinning. I didn't know what was going on. I thought, as you heard me say at that book party, I thought my career might be over. I was...
Didn't you kind of expect it, though, at some point?
I expected at some point they would have a conversation with me and ask me to make a choice or something like that. I did not expect it, 1, to come so suddenly, and 2, that they would act in such a way as to try to personally damage me. See, I think that's the element that was most upsetting to me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know, for example, if Fox would say, well, you know, you have been now so, you know, damaged that, you know, we think it's not a good thing to have you here. I didn't know what people, and what, to answer your question about why it was valuable to have Michael Clemente guide me there, was I didn't say anything to anybody. I spoke to my wife that night, and then I went back on the air to do the Sean Hannity show that night in New York. We didn't discuss this, didn't come up, and then afterwards Sean said to me something about, hey, you okay? You don't seem like you seem like something's wrong, and then I told him. But at just that time, then NPR leaked the story, and the story was now getting out, and now I was getting calls from everywhere. And my fear was, look, NPR is a major news organization. They've got stations in every market. They've got a big megaphone. I'm one person. And they are now positioning me as a bad person, a bigot, someone who has acted in such a way as to damage Muslims in America and the world. And I'm thinking, you know, how am I supposed to respond to this? I don't have any PR firm. I don't have any publicist, as Vivian Schiller suggested. I'm one person. So who's going to believe me as opposed to all the millions of people who listen to NPR and love NPR? They're all going to say, well, Juan Williams must have done something terrible. He must be a bad journalist.
I want you to hear what CNN did with this story. John King, listen to the words of John King.
Okay.
And listen to the words of Roland Martin regarding, I don't know if you've seen this, let's roll.
I remember also that when the Times Square bomber was at court, I think this is just last week, he said the war with Muslims, America's war with is just beginning, first drop of blood. I don't think there's any way to get away from these facts, but I think there are people who want to somehow remind us all, as President Bush did after 9/11, it's not a war against Islam.
Now, Roland, you were shaking your head a bit during that. I want to say I've known Juan for a number of years. He's a very fair guy. He's a straightforward guy. He's a thoughtful guy. And you're shaking your head at that. But a lot of Americans, rightly or wrongly, and I think a lot of Americans probably have those very same sentiments. They get a little bit nervous, and they probably also feel guilty about it. But by human nature, especially right after 9/11, they get nervous about it.
Here's why I shook my head when he said, these are the facts. No, Juan, that is your perspective. That is your opinion. You're basing it based upon a particular stereotype. Just like I'm sure Juan Williams would be offended if he got to the elevator and a white woman clutched her purse when she saw a black man. I've had that experience. Again, if I wore African garb, somebody might see that as Muslim garb. They could make a determination. But also, if I see a white guy with a crew cut and some black boots and a black leather jacket, I don't automatically think, is he a neo-Nazi? In the 1980s, when the FBI was raiding the Jewish Defense League, their offices, I wouldn't look at somebody who is Jewish and look and say, well, if you have a certain hat on, a certain attire, oh, you might be a member of the JDL. That's the problem when we allow a stereotype to be placed upon everyone.
What do you think? I mean, this is a journalism show. John King comes from the Associated Press. He says you're fair and you're thoughtful, and I think he may have even said you're honest. Is that the role of somebody to play, or Roland Martin on the other side? I mean, this is all goes back to your book about being provocative. These are all provocative programs now.
Well, I think that what John was saying was that he had some experience with me, and so he has some background, and he puts it in a context, and he says, here's what I know of this person. I don't know this person to be a provocateur. And then I think what you heard from Roland Martin was Roland Martin suggesting, and again, I don't think there's any basis for it, that I was trucking in stereotypes. I'm not playing in stereotypes. 9/11 really happened, and yes, I was expressing a feeling as opposed to Roland Martin suggesting an opinion. An opinion would be, oh, based on my perception here, here is the public policy prescription that I would embrace. That's my opinion. No, that was not an opinion. I was just being flat out honest. That's the kind of visceral response I had after 9/11 to seeing people in Muslim garb at airports. And as King said, I don't think I'm alone. I must tell you that in the aftermath of this whole incident, Brian, the number of people who come up to me and say, you know, they feel muzzled and they've had a similar feeling is legion. I mean, it's not one or two people.
Who named it Muzzled, your book?
You know, it was one of the initial titles that I came up with. I was thinking about, you know, silenced, fired, you can't say that, muzzled. And then I had second thoughts because I thought it makes me out to be some kind of crazed animal. And, you know, being black, I'm very sensitive about the whole notion of not being a thoughtful, smart person and all that. And then when I would talk about it with friends or even with other people in journalism, they'd say, "Oh, muzzle, that works. That's punchy. That's the kind of thing that will catch a reader's eye in a bookstore. If only we had more bookstores."
I'm intrigued though that we started talking about this early in the program, that men say, "Juan, you got a good deal here. You got a 3-year contract, $2 million, whatever it is." Women come up and say, "Are you all right?"
Right.
Do you still get that? I mean, is that still happening after all this?
Yeah, it happened, recently at the book party. That people say, I think it is that men think in terms of money, and they just basically say, "What's the bottom line here? Are you getting paid? Can you pay for your family's existence and all that? And I think the emotional damage apparently something women tap into, because women are. It's still the case, will come up to me and say, "Have you recovered from this emotionally?"
Every time something like this happens, the Republicans go after NPR's money from the feds.
Right.
And they never get it. Why? In
Well,
other words, they didn't do, again, this time around, a lot of smoke and a lot of excitement, and I think your friend Sean Hannity was after take the money away from them, but they still get the money.
I think they get the money because Americans, and especially not only the Democrats in the Congress, but the president, see it as, in terms of a bottom line issue, that, leave it alone. That they value NPR, and that I think many Americans value NPR, conservatives and liberals, by the way, as a news source. And there's a reluctance to take that money away. Now, I've come to the conclusion, in the midst of all this debate and watching the politics of it, and people in the Democratic congressional campaign sending out newsletters saying, "We've got to protect NPR because it's the antidote to Rush Limbaugh," that, I don't think journalists should have to be responsive to one side or the other.
Well, if it's the antidote to Rush Limbaugh, that means they're admitting that it's a liberal network that
That's
they
what
like.
I'm saying. And if I, as the journalist at NPR, then have to think, well, you know what, I need Democrats to support me because the Republicans are after me, and therefore I'm just going to advance Democratic points of view, it becomes an illegitimate
But if you're a
operation.
conservative taxpayer, why would you want to pay for a network
That's right.
like this?
I agree. But again, that's why you suddenly see it become so highly politicized. And I think that's to the detriment of NPR.
We have some video from the party that was held in your honor and seeing some people, and we're just about out of time. Our guest has been Juan Williams. We can look at this, and as we go out, you can tell us if you recognize anybody in these pictures. I must say there's Ron Kessler.
Exactly, who has a new book out, Secrets About the FBI.
We'll also see
There's
Scott
Scott
Simon.
There's my friend Scott Simon from NPR. And he was one of the few NPR people who deigned to come. There's Britt Hume with his wife, Kim Hume, who've been, very supportive throughout this whole mess. That's Congressman Ted Poe of Texas.
Where are your liberal friends, though? You don't see them at this party. Except
Well, Scott was there. No, I have liberal friends that came to the party. I must say, right there, Dan Lothian from CNN, Brett Baer is in the background, and to their right is a professor, a very liberal professor from the University of Maryland, I might add. Now there's Bill Kristol. Now there's a conservative friend. He's a true conservative, the editor of the Weekly Standard.
We're out of time, but thank you, Juan Williams. The name of the book is Muzzled, The Assault on Honest Debate.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian.
For a DVD copy of this program, call 1-877-662-7726. For free transcripts or to give us your comments about this program, visit us at qna.org. Q&A programs are also available as C-SPAN podcasts.